This afternoon, we're going to...
Would you say, you've already had a wonderful lunch?
Good.
Yes. Okay, stand up. Just stand up. Oh, you don't have to. And then just sit down again. That'll give you about 30 minutes before lunch will kick in again, and you might want to drift to sleep. And about 30 minutes, if you stand up again, that'll get you another 30 minutes. Go, Bill, go.
No,
I just don't want everyone falling asleep like that.
Oh, no, okay. Well, I'll try and keep everyone awake. But, we're finishing at 4, so we can't send people home without a cup of tea or coffee or something. Can we? No. So when would we? Will we try to have a bit of afternoon tea about 3:30? What do you think? And then go home. 4. Okay, we'll be heading for 3:30. I'm going to be doing this. I did all this. Now, I want to talk about this thing called healing the family tree. This started in 1984 when I met a man called Kenneth McCall who wrote this book, Healing the Family Tree. And that's quite a while ago now. And so I decided to, I visited him twice in England. At one stage we did a joint presentation at Southampton General Hospital and got the Asian flu at the same time. Yeah. And this is a very interesting thing. I don't quite understand the theology, but I'll just describe it. A sensitive, innocent person begins suffering from strange symptoms that do not respond to any medical treatment and are unexplained by medical investigations. I might as well tell you my last one. This is a person that I saw this year. I'll change the names, and I call him Stan, and he's got 7 siblings. There's 8 in the family, and he's the youngest. And they've all got, they come from they're Polish Catholics, and they're real Catholic. Real Catholic. And the first 7 of these kids have gotten huge university degrees, and they've got marvellous jobs with huge incomes. And poor old Stan's got this, he's smart, but he had dyslexia. So he got a vocational grade 12, and but it wasn't enough for him to go on for tertiary education. But he got a job, and he quite likes the job of inputting data into computers for these traffic engineers. The only trouble is it's part-time. And he's in love with the lovely Christina, I'll call her. But that's not her name. At work. But he can't pledge his troth until he gets a full-time job. So anyway, he's a bit worried about this, looking for a full-time job, but there's no other problems. Next thing, he starts to get all these spasms in his neck. So he goes to the doctor, and they have an x-ray, and they can't find anything, and he gives him some spasm tablets, and that don't work, so he gets sent to a physiotherapist who did things on him, and that didn't work either. And then he declares to his family, the world will be better off without me. And the hair stood up on the back of their necks. Because although Stan didn't know anything about it, that was what his grandfather, Peter, was declaring just before he hanged himself. Now, Stan had no idea of this, but he was suffering from the symptoms. Just imagine that Peter had started drinking, becoming a nuisance, and then declared that the world would be better off without him. And he hanged himself and did it the way amateurs usually do it, and they just strangle themselves with a rope. they don't do the hangman thing in the long drop like any sensible human being would. But so I saw, yeah, you want to make a good job of it if you're going to hang yourself. I'm not in favour of that anyway. I'm not in favour of suicide whatsoever. But anyway, Stan didn't know anything about this at all. But anyway, his older sister came with him to the consultation, and she was able to well, I'm taking the history, and she was able to tell us what had happened. And the Lord told me, or somebody does, somebody speaks to me, and it's my own voice. It's louder than a thought, and it's less than a voice. It says, take them through the renewal of baptismal promises. And I had one of these, couple of sheets of this. The Catholic Church and the Anglican Church like to do this when we're baptising somebody. Right? And I think I don't know whether we do it at confirmation as well, but so I played the role of the priest, and they played the role of the grandfather. Because what had happened after this grandfather hanged himself, this really, really Catholic family was so ashamed of him. They never ever, he at least he got a Christian funeral, but nobody's ever spoken his name since then. So anyway, we did the renewal of baptismal promises, and because the grandfather had taken his own life, sin. So we were going to take him through the renewal. Anyway, this is what the Lord told me. So we did that. Anyway, I saw him 2 weeks later, and he was with his mother. And his mother said, "Oh, Stan's a lot better since he saw you last time." Anyway, his mother then reaffirmed that the whole family was so ashamed that when the grandfather hanged himself that they just wouldn't mention his name. So I said, "Look, do you think you could organise a Blessed Eucharist for him? Could you organise a communion service for memorial thing for the grandfather?" And the mother said, "Yeah, well, I will do that." And that was it. I didn't see him after that. I might as well just tell you a couple more. Just to give you an idea what we're talking about. There was a woman who was married to a real estate agent, and he wasn't doing too bad in business, and he loved her, and she loved him, and they had 4 kids, and she loved the kids, and the kids loved her, and everything was. And then all of a sudden, one day, she got this overpowering, awful feeling that the only thing that she could describe it, she said, "Look, it's as though I would never see my family ever again." And it's also a feeling, it's a suffocating feeling. It's in here. And there was so she went to see 3 different psychiatrists who gave her all these different tablets, alone and in combination. She saw a GP who was good at psychiatry, and he gave lots of tablets. And then, thank God, they didn't give her shock treatment. But anyway, she came to see me. Here's the story. Her father was a retired regimental sergeant major and a real bad alcoholic. So he started drinking at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and by 7 o'clock at night, Mr. Nasty would have come out, and he was just really a nasty human being until he went to sleep. This woman, she had a brother who was 8 years older than her. And when he was 17 and he finished grade 12, he wanted to join the army. And so he'd applied, and they were going to write to him to see if he got in or not. So he didn't want to, it was after school, he didn't want to apply for jobs. So he had 2 weeks, he had a couple of weeks on his hands. And so he decided to spend the time sexually interfering with his 9-year-old sister. And this went on for a couple of weeks. And she was too scared to tell her father. She was too scared to tell him anything. She didn't want to, but she knew she was going to tell her mother. She knew her mother wouldn't put up with it. But she was a bit scared that if the mother tackled the brother would backhand the mother or something. But she just didn't know what to do. And after 2 weeks of this, a letter arrives. He's gotten into the army and he's gone. And she made sure that she kept away from this place all the rest of his life, which ended in he had a car smash. And she said he wasn't actually killed in the accident. He had a stove in chest because he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. And he suffocated in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Now, as she's telling me this, there's a sort of like a little bell. It wasn't a bell, but something goes ding. She is re-experiencing what he experienced as he died. And, he's off in the ambulance, with stove in chest, and he's dying, and he's suffocating. And then, she said, when she started thinking about this and when it was 5 years to the day when she started experiencing this awful. And so I'd never seen my family again, and then I was suffocating. So I said, she and her family were Anglicans, and I said, do you think you could arrange with your local priest a communion service for your brother? And what I'd like you to say at that memorial communion service is something like this: Lord, I want to apologise to you on behalf of my brother for the way that he sexually abused me when I was a girl, and I ask you to have mercy on his soul. She couldn't forgive him. And remember, Jesus said, if you lead a little child into sin, you might as well have a whacking big rock fight and throw it in the ocean. You're going to be in big strife. So anyway, I saw it 2 weeks later. They did. They went and saw their priest, organised the community service. 2 weeks later, she's normal. I've got many, many cases of this. It's usually a highly sensitive person in the family who usually knows nothing about this lot. There's something to do with the soul. So a sensitive, innocent person begins suffering from this. Like, no medical treatment ever works. The family tree searched and the person is identified. The manner of death resembles the undiagnosed and untreatable symptoms. So these are the characteristics of this. The patient's suffering has not responded to medical treatment and counselling. The suffering cannot be explained as a reaction to stressful events in the patient's lifestyle or personal history. The suffering appears to be symbolic of the manner of death or of some unresolved issue involving a member of the family tree. And the patient's suffering is relieved by addressing the unresolved issue in a communion service. Now, that's what we would hope to do, because in a communion service, we believe that Jesus, the Son of God, and the Holy Spirit, or the Holy Spirit, is present in a communion service in a particular way that if we can't do a communion service, I do a Catholic sort of thing with, or whatever, or a little Christian thing in my room. The suffering of an innocent person may represent a living memorial to a lost soul. Now, these are the fairly common anorexia nervosa. Ken McCall had many cases, and actually he had a series of cases that he presented to an American journal, British journal, a psychiatric journal, about cases of anorexia nervosa. And this is a common thing. There's a couple, whether they're going to get married or not, next thing they're pregnant. It's a bit embarrassing. So they have an abortion. And then they go ahead and get married, and then they have children. And if the firstborn's a girl, for some reason there's something, you find that this kid has picked up a story that says, if you can't shape up, you better ship out. If you can't be perfect, you don't belong here. And it's the consciousness associated with that lost soul. And so, very frequently, these are cases of anorexia nervosa. And when you name that lost baby, you hand it over to God, you apologize for throwing the child away, and the kid, he is healed. Chronic depression, unexplained phobias, these things are common. I'll tell you a couple of more stories. Ken McCall actually healed a man without ever seeing him, because this was Ken's English. There was an old man who was in the First World War in one of the trenches, and he was soldiering on with two of his friends who'd been to. They went to primary school in this village together. They went to their education, and they joined the army, and they were in the same unit. And actually, they were standing in the same trench, the three of them, when in the First World War, a very potent source of problems like this. As a German bomb comes over and just blows the whole thing to smithereens, blew these other two guys to bits. There wasn't any bits, and blew this guy's arm off at the elbow. And Ken said there was a nurse who was actually giving this man regular shots of morphine for this phantom limb pain. He had this phantom limb. It felt like he had a grotesque, painful limb. Nothing could be, they did everything, just couldn't be resolved. So Ken McCall talked to this bloke on the phone. Did you have a funeral for your two friends? Well, no, there was nothing to bury, so there was no funeral. So anyway, he said, well, would it be reasonable to assume that your phantom limb pain is the only living memorial to these two lost souls? Yeah. So anyway, he arranged to go and see the vicar, organise a communion service for the lost two things. And when the vicar said, yeah, right, okay, Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock, the pain left him. And never came back. And it wasn't, it's the intention to have the service. It's more than the service itself. Yeah. Now, it's the end of yeah, the woman had seen 3 psychiatrists. The girl started giving away her lunch. This is a story. This girl was going to a Catholic school, and she started giving away her lunch to the other girls. And she started losing weight, and she got skinnier and skinnier, and then she had real bad anorexia nervosa, and she was in the Chermside Hospital. Somebody said that this was terminal, and she was even going to die. Now, I don't know. I can't remember. It was a fair while ago, and I can't remember how I got involved. But here's the story. Her grandmother was married to a Dutch ship pilot who used to be the pilot used to bring the ships in and out of Jakarta Harbour in Indonesia, in Java. And then the war broke out, and this pilot, the Allies, the British or the Australians, took him away because he was very useful for shipping, for the war effort in the Second World War. The mother, with the mother and three kids, were sort of left there. And when the Japanese arrived, the mother and the three kids were put into a camp. And they weren't very well fed. And the mother began giving her food away to the three children, not eating herself. And then she got sick and died fairly abruptly. So these three kids were sort of left on their own. And the oldest was this boy who was 12. So at the end of the war, the father was in Fremantle, and there was a Red Cross ship coming into the harbour with what he thought was his wife and his three kids, but it turned out that it wasn't. It was another family of the same name. And he couldn't find out where his children were, or his wife, so he had to go back to Indonesia and search for them, and eventually he found that when the mother had died, she was buried somewhere. The three kids were moved to another camp and then to another camp and somewhere else. So the kids didn't know where the mother was buried. But the boy, who was 12 years old, had been very good at looking after his two little siblings. So anyway, the father brought them back to Australia, and the boy grows up and becomes a school teacher. And they have three kids. And the eldest is this girl who was, I think she was 12 when she started. She was 12 and she had two little kids, and they were actually the same ages as the father was the 12-year-old boy in Indonesia who was looking after his little sibling. And this girl was then at the same age as her father was when he had to start looking after his siblings. And that's when she started giving her lunch away to the other kids. And she was supposed to have resembled the grandmother very much. So anyway, I suggested we have to have a memorial service because nobody knew where the grandmother was buried. She'd never had a proper funeral as far as the family was concerned. So anyway, does anyone here know Father Colin Roberts, who used to be Everton Park, very, very holy Anglican priest? But anyway, he had a communion service for her, and she just recovered. That was this. So there was this, and I suppose when you think about it, the manner of death of the grandmother was starvation. a school teacher who got the God bug, studied at Bible college, got a certificate to run a home church, and started running this home church. Now, this guy was a phys ed teacher. Next thing, he's got these awful pains in the neck, sharp pains, and x-rays didn't show anything, no treatment worked, the usual stuff. His uncle was one of the Australian pilots in Ireland, who got beheaded by the Japanese, Amber. And this guy, he was the only Christian in his family. Next thing, he's got this pain right where the sword would have gone through the uncle's neck. So I encouraged him to have some sort of service. But I don't quite know how that resolved. But it was another one of them. Now, Edgar is the name of my uncle. He died as a prisoner of war in July 1945 in Japan. And the Japanese at that time were quite, well, they knew they were being beaten. So they weren't game to really do anything cruel to the war. They were on their best behaviour, the people who were looking after the prisoners of war. And so my uncle's diary, he'd written all his diaries and pencil and stuff. They got sent back through the Red Cross. It was just a soldier in the bed next door to Edgar's. That's why I was interested in your new dog. They got a little dog called Edgar. And it was probably Edgar who influenced that name, by the way. But when I was 40, I had this awful feeling of being an outsider. And it was very distressing. And I kept thinking about his diary, and I wondered who had this diary. And I eventually found his diary. My aunt had it. But nobody ever read it. Because his mother, my grandmother, she wouldn't even hear of his name. If anyone said his name, she'd go into a blue funk. Nobody was allowed to buy anything made in Japan. It was terrible. So the real truth why she overreacted was that she was an army nurse in Cairo in the First World War. When this lieutenant in the 4th Light Horse came into this officer's ward, very handsome fellow was my grandfather, and nature took its course on the night shift. Next thing, she's in the family way. There's this sudden wedding in Cairo, a military wedding, and she comes back to live with her friend up at Redford and gave birth to Edgar. It was named after her brother. His name was Leslie Edgar George. And there was these pictures of him as a newborn. He looked really, he's about 8 pounds 7. But my beautiful aunt, who was innocent as the day as well, she had the story. Edgar was 3 months premature and had to be carefully oiled. The story, the truth is, that Edgar wasn't 3 months premature. He was a normal bouncing boy, born at the right time, and there was the relatives that had to be carefully oiled about the real truth. Now, I don't know whether it was my grandmother reacted badly because they started school before the bell rang or whatever. People used to get a bit funny about that those days. But anyway, I found out that our family never had a funeral for him. They must have had a funeral in Japan. So I arranged a communion service, and you'd be interested. Where is my Billo mates from Billawheeler, where I was born? Oh, yeah, okay. Well, on the Mount Morgan Road, 12 miles from Billo, is Jambin. And there was an Anglican church there, and that's where we had this communion service. And that day, the two things just lifted. The feeling of being an outsider just disappeared, and everybody started talking about him. And everybody's been talking about Edgar ever since. So I published his diary, and I met lots and lots of people that he'd known, and I've got a second edition out of that diary. And if you're interested, that diary, the second edition, with some very, very interesting facts, is in the USB drive. So now, after Edgar died, after I sorted out Edgar, I was aware of. See, I was interested in this healing of family tree anyway, and I was doing these cases. And then I was aware of something that was underlying this feeling. That this was a feeling in here of a black ball, like a ball bearing, was very hard. And it was associated with hatred for people in authority. Now, I didn't have any reason to hate people in authority, but I discovered in our family there was a guy called James Wilkie, who was a member of the Covenanters Army. Now, have we got any historians here that the Poms were always going up and bashing the hell out of the Scots. And the Scots and the Poms tried to impose the Anglican Church onto the Scots who were Presbyterians or Calvinists. So at one stage there was an army, and of course, as usual, the Pommy army would come up and kill the king. And so the King of Scotland was usually about 18 months old. And the Queen was usually the regent, and it was just gone on and on. It was just ridiculous. But anyway, James was one of these, and because he was a ringleader of this Covenanters army that opposed the English, he and there were supposed to be 100 ringleaders, and they were all put into Greyfriars churchyard. Has anyone been to Edinburgh and been up to see the wee Bobby at Greyfriars? No one? Well, this was a churchyard in Edinburgh, and their clothes were taken off. Here's 100 naked men, summer and winter, in the open. They just wanted to kill him. Anyway, he didn't. He was 6 years in that. And at the end of 6 years, he was tried, and they asked him, would he swear allegiance to King Charles II? Well, knowing King Charles II, I don't know anyone who would swear allegiance to him. But anyway, apparently, James sort of said no. So they decided to hang him. So they hanged him in 1685. Now, I was speaking at St. Mary Magdalene's Church at Baden in October 1989. And I had discovered just before that about the real facts about how he was hanged. But our family was such a mob of clerical big shots in Scotland that as a favour to the clergy family of the Wilkins, this bloke was hanged under the name of James Wilkinson. Now, I didn't make a mistake, so I followed there was the court case, got the transcript of that, and some historians just called him by his right name. So I was speaking, and that night he showed up. He wasn't the only person that showed up that night. There was a little girl about that tall who was dressed all in white with long white stockings and she was. I see people in a sort of a see-through sort of a semi-transparent thing. And he's there. I mean, I've been praying for him for a good year since I found out in 1988, I found out the real truth. In our family tree, it said, he suffered grievous persecutions, but there is a minor difference between being persecuted and being executed. You know, it's worth noting. And and here he is, this guy. He was just like Andy's shirt, that coloured little shirt there. It was like as though he was dug out from the side of the road up at Kingaroy. He was about 4'11" tall, and he was wearing Hessian bag. He had one of those, like, you know, you get a Hessian bag, you knock the thing out and stick it up there like that. And everything was made out of Hessian. Now, I didn't know until December that year, when we were in Scotland, or when we were in St Andrews, that these people had had their clothes taken off them. Some thoughtful person must have thrown a few bags over the fence. But he was wearing Hessian moccasins and Hessian trousers, and he had a Hessian bag with some stuff around, and there he was. So I took communion for him, and I saw him being transformed. And he went off to the left. I don't know why. When this has happened before, they moved off to the left. So perhaps there's one of the left wingers there on the other side. But anyway, I lost that night the feeling of hating people in authority disappeared. But just lately, I might as well just mention this. I've been looking at some research of people looking at birthmarks. Birthmarks that kids are born with, corresponding exactly to how somebody died. You know, was it a previous life? Well, I've got a birthmark just off to the side, up high, the back that I've always had, soy finger. Looks like an exit wound. I've got a spherical lump there that's round and smooth, and I can get my fingers behind it. And I've become very much aware of it since I joined the Zipper Club on the 8th of February and had my triple bypass. I go, visiting it. Now, I don't know where he cut, but since then, I'm sure it's just a lump of cartilage, but it's spherical. I think it represents. This is just fanciful. In those days, when they did these judicial hangings, they come along on this trolley thing and they put these people up there, and they didn't care about it. Just let them dangle and strangle, you know. And if you if you were a highwayman or something or another, and you could bribe somebody, pay somebody, the moment you run it, pull your legs to break your neck. I think somebody shot him just as he died. I reckon somebody underneath with a big musket. This was 1685 after all. They had the big mad bull. Bang, got him there, and the exit wound was there. Now, this is just fanciful stuff. But anyway, I lost by taking communion from him. I lost the feeling of hating people in authority. So it's I'll just give you two more. Well, she went up, and when somebody took communion in front of her, she just sort of, it looked as though she shared in it. There's a lot of interesting things And that was, the priest was Vince Hobbs. You know, a lot of people think he's a saint. He's still alive, our Vince. And he was the chaplain to the charismatic renewal. Lovely bloke. This is a man with no personality. You know, he'd pray for people and they'd fall over. And he'd pray for people and they'd be cured. And you'd think he'd have this marvellous charismatic personality because he was a chaplain. You know, he had a personality like this cardinal. But, you know, it wasn't his personality. If anyone knows, you know it, don't you? Yes, it's still alive, our lovely Vince. Yeah, well, praise the Lord. So, right. Now, I get some of, what do you think is the dimension of spiritual, or no, how obvious? Bunch of questions required. Identify the root causes of Japanese or the came out reasonably good and left able. What's the difference in 3 or 4 saints of the Lord? And I'm not Presbyterian or Catholic, that's not the issue. Or you having communion. I understand it. I mean, I was brought up in the environment of the church. But what do you think is happening spiritually? I just think it's a matter of sincerity. Like, I do believe that the Blessed Eucharist is a focal point of Christianity. But I do believe that there's the presence of the Holy Spirit. And this is what I actually really do appreciate with my pastor here and Ian. Where's Ian? Oh. When these guys do the Blessed Eucharist and invoke the Holy Spirit, they're fair dinkum. It's so this little new church is not Protestant. Is it? It's not Protestant, is it? No. And I just believe that is an absolutely focal point of Christianity. There's the death and the resurrection, and this is my body. Yeah.
You just briefly, we talked earlier when we started the day about the Lord's Prayer and having those 7 keys. You'll notice in there, give us this day our daily bread. And that's asking God for healing. The daily bread is God's healing. It's His sustenance that He gives us. And we talked earlier, Bill, about the power of correspondences. And when correspondences go astray, it's magic. But when they're done right, with the right heart, correspondences are not magic. There's a direct connection between the spirit world and that physical object. So I'm not saying that the bread is the body of Jesus, literally. That's not my point. The point is that God is connecting with your spirit and your mind and your heart through the act of Holy Supper. And so you're acting out a prayer. And that prayer is healing. So I just find it fascinating that every time, Bill, that you've done this, you've made communion and Holy Supper at the core of it, because there is that acting out of forgiveness, there's that acting out of healing, which the Lord makes available. It's a body. Beautiful. So go to it, and I'll finish, but go to it on a quantum level. God saves us, not man. Man can't save us. But God became man. There's that horizon, the earth meeting heaven. And when God took form among us on a quantum level, He's made the way for healing. Healing of everything. And if you think about it, the Jewish people had all these rituals and customs. They're symbolic of all sorts of things going on inside you. As God, you are God's temple. Your body is God's temple. So all of these things going on inside their sacrifices, what actually about things going on inside you. And the Lord replaced all of that with baptism, which is a washing, and Holy Supper. Everything's in that.
See, when we read John's Gospel, Jesus is preaching to someone old, and he says, look, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you won't have life in you, or something. Now, he had a lot of followers at that point, and they said, this guy's nuts. And they just disappeared. They said, oh, we're not going to put up with this rubbish. So they left, and Jesus said to the 12, you blokes going too? And Peter said, look, well, where would we go? You have the words of eternal life. But if you read down a few more verses, he's actually saying to the 12 later, look, he could have said, I should have chosen my words more carefully, or he could have said something, but he said, look, you didn't understand what I was saying because my words were full of spirit and life, or something. Now, we believe that the word that Jesus represents or represented or was the word. And the word was like, this is very deep and mysterious, who and what the word is. But I get the feeling when I'm reading John's Gospel that he's speaking as a human being with human being thinking, and that if he were, like if it was another 100 years and that theology of Jesus is the word, he could have said, look, you didn't understand what I was saying because I was speaking as the word, and therefore I could make anything represent, anything be my body. I could make anything be my blood because I was speaking as the word. But I don't think, he was speaking as a human being. I think that he probably didn't even understand it himself.
What Bill's talking about is exinonation. Exinonation, which just means states of humility. In order for God to save us, how does hell attack God? Can it?
No.
But God become man. And the hells could attack with all that fury, and he overcame it. So in your gospel, when you read the Gospels, you've got to remember there's always periods where he's talking as the Son to the Father. For us. It even says it in John 17. I pray this way, Father, not because you need it, but for those that hear me praying this way. So he's modelling, every moment of the way, he's modelling how we can be sons and daughters of God. So there's states of humility there where he's being man and turning to God. And then there are other points where Peter says, look, just show us the Father, Jesus, and we'll be satisfied. And he says, Peter, how long have I been with you? You've seen me, you've seen the Father. So that's a moment of glorification. And he finished the glorification process in the cross and in death. So when he came up out of the grave, he was now fully God and man. And this is the thing, you can't love something you don't understand. But now we have a God that's taken on flesh and blood. It's quite a mystery, and yet you can have this relationship with God. So there you go. That's states of humility.
Well, that is a new thing, which was Christ when the gospel came, because Jews were not used to this relationship with God.
Not at all.
Not at all. Especially not seeing as their father.
He was a pretty mean God in their eyes.
Yeah, it's someone you had to obey and clean yourself up,
Fear.
get it right with.
Yeah.
And Jesus came and said, you're not my slaves. I'm introducing you to your Heavenly Father. But the funny thing is, by having a relationship and seeing Him, that's when they got it.
I'll just share one other story. I remember hearing a friend of mine who said his son, very little, would come to him in the middle of the night and say, oh, Dad, I'm scared. He says, oh, don't be scared. Come on, take him back to bed, tuck him, pray with him. He said this particular night it happened 3 times. And the 3rd time, his son comes to says, Dad, I'm scared. He said, you don't have to be scared. God's with you. And the little child says, but I want God with skin on.
Skin on.
Yeah, I want God with skin on. Isn't it? There's this way that what we see in the Lord, in the Gospels, is not what the Jews could see in God. They saw an angry God, and then he came and displayed what love is, what love looks like. Yeah, because we need that.
Well, what I was hoping you might mention today, or somebody might mention, is where this is happening, because I see souls in this intermediate state.
You do, you see them. Yeah.
I do, I see them.
Yes.
And I'll tell you the last lot that I saw. There's this river, and it doesn't have, on this side is there's a wall, beautiful, like the ancient walls, so beautiful, bricks just fit together. It's just beautiful. It's about that tall, and it just runs the entire length of this river. And the other side of the river, it's like when these rivers in New Zealand run into the sea, they don't have a bank, they just got boulders and that sort of thing. And I saw this way in the distance. I saw and there was this little dot, and then it became a bunch of people, and they go closer and closer. And down here in the foreground is this pool that's about knee deep, and they're all standing around. There's 23 of them. I was told that. I didn't bother trying to count. And I recognised, I knew who one was, because she was wearing her high school formal dress when she gassed herself into the parents' car. And I recognised one bloke, he'd been a patient of mine, and he threw himself over a train at Newmarket. And but they were all young people, and they'd all killed themselves. They'd all committed suicide, but I was given the message that that's the only thing they ever did wrong.
Yeah.
They were headed for heaven. They were lovely people, really nice people. Now we always say it's nice people that die and kill themselves. Anyway, they're waiting there. Next thing, the Baptist arrives, and he's wearing a camel skin outfit, so it's leather.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got a round wooden bowl, about that round, about that big, and it's wooden. It's got lapis lazuli, that bluey semi-precious stone all around it. I could actually, I think I should paint it one of these days and make one. And there he goes. There's 23 of them, and he's baptising them. Now it takes a long time to do this, and when he does, he has a good talk to them. And they go away one by one. They're very happily just go up. And there's a Baptist there, talking to one bloke for quite a long time, and then next thing there's nothing. When I decided I want to look in there, and I don't choose to try to look into this thing. It just happens, and I don't particularly want to do it. But it seems to me that these spirits, they were in a rehab up there, and they were all in this one class, and
graduated.
Well, one class, and they said, look, if you're willing to go to walk down there and wait for as long as it takes, and you get baptised from that one sin of killing yourself, you can then do your classes, your ancient classes.
Wow.
Now that's what. So what I want to know is I don't know this sort of stuff, but I want to know, is anybody, where is this taking place? Is this healing the family?
Well, it's good that you bring that up, because if he ends up wanting to do the seminary next year, and I'll be in on it, what happens when you die?
Yeah.
It's that the world of the spirits is the airport. You hear about these near-death experiences, right? You get a lot more of them now because people are surviving because of technology. And the reality is that they line up with what's been taught, but they don't always line up with very rigid, fundamental Christian views. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so what those people do to try and cope with that is say, oh, it must be the devil deluding or something. It's a delusion. But here's what Swedenborg saw, that the world of spirits, which is very close in kind of energy to our material world, when you first die, you'll be brought among people that love you, and it will mirror this world very closely. And then you get to heal. You get to heal of a lot of the things that are still holding you back. And that's what you were seeing, Bill. This whole John the Baptist, it typifies, because John the Baptist is very rough, hairy, gruff. That's how we see the Bible. Read Shakespeare, you get a much better read, really. But when you get to the spirit of the Word, its eloquence is unmatchable. You pass the external. So here's John the Baptist taking us out of our external states of our mind and preparing us for heaven. And the world of spirits is where people are being prepared for heaven. Prepare the way. So we're being prepared for heaven, or we're being prepared for hell. Now, I'm not saying God never damns anyone or sends anyone to hell. Nor would anybody suiciding go to hell. It's not these one-off things in our life that really matter. It's who we're becoming, isn't it? What parent looks at a child and says, "You fell over 50 times"? They focus in on the one moment the child's starting to walk and take a few steps. That's where they get excited. And God's not looking at our failures. He's looking at who are we becoming. Who are we becoming? Sorry? The direction we're going. People that don't know the Lord, won't cut you off, but people that don't know... Yes, Alex. What do we want?
Yeah. You're in no danger, you're not going there. If you don't want to go there, heaven is a place where people gladly go.
Yeah.
So whoever you are, dead or alive, if you're sitting there saying, "I just don't want to go," God will respect you.
Alex, think about it, right? New Jerusalem. It's got 12 gates that are always open. But it's the gates of hell that are closed. God's not locking anyone out of heaven. But it's up to us. It is up to us to follow him or to not follow him. So look, those one-off things that we do, as you saw, I think the Lord was showing you that those people that you cared for and loved for were not lost.
Oh, yes.
They're not lost.
Right. So, recently, I just mentioned, what have I got on here? These are things out of the Bible. Oh, yes, I'm going to mention the hungry ghosts. As we sit here, one Chinese person in 10 in China has diabetes. And one in 2 Chinese people has pre-diabetes. Why? What the heck's going on? And let me tell you about an experiment that was done in Toronto in Canada. These scientists were working with diabetic mice. They were bred to have diabetes according to souls. And now, I don't know how big a mice pancreas would be, but they worked out how to separate the nerves, to kill the nerves supplying the pancreas insulin-producing cells. And they had to do it chemically, but that's what was happening. So they did this. They denervated the pancreases of these little mice. And the next day, they were normal. They were not diabetic anymore. And you think, what the heck's going on? This was done in 2006, which is 13 years ago. And I've faithfully been following up all the research. I think I know it. But I've been looking to see what the scientists had to say about it. And there's not a word, not a sausage. They haven't even mentioned it because but it's like there's a factory that produces insulin. And it's not producing much insulin at all. But one day the manager drops dead. And then the next day factory balloons into full production. What's going on? Obviously, the management has been telling something, there's been something wrong. The management has been saying, don't produce insulin. Now, why would the unconscious mind, which is like the autonomic nervous system, why would it do that? And because we now have all the data. They've now followed up the famine in the Ukraine caused by Stalin. They've followed up people, and they've now followed up the survivors of the 1958 to 62 famine in China, caused by the stupidity of Mao Zedong, who told all these farmers that they had to go kill starlings, but forgot to tell them to plant the crops. So there was this terrible famine in recent times, 58 to 62. And they've studied the survivors, their children and the grandchildren have all got type 2 diabetes. This hasn't got anything to do with genetics. It's a thing called epigenetics. Switching the stuff up. Yeah. Now, it's got nothing to do with eating too much or eating the wrong stuff or not getting enough exercise, because in the developed countries, like the incidence of diabetes is dropping in the United States and Australia and the UK, but in the third world, it's going like that. It's associated with famines. It's of the 10 worst famines in the 20th, that horrible genocidal 20th century, China suffered 4 of them. And what I believe is happening is the spirits of those people who starved to death are sort of saying to the well-fed people of the 21st century, this is what it feels like to starve to death. It's the same thing that I've been finding with this Healing the Family Tree. This is how we guide. Please don't forget us. We need your prayers. Because, see, when our community gets starved to death, most of the time the whole family dies. There's nobody around to bury you or pray for you or say who. But, and sometimes, whole extended families just gone without any respect. So that's what I think is happening now. Just imagine your unconscious mind is saying, you're starving to death, mate. And what it does, it switches you down your thyroid gland to lower your metabolic rate. It switches off your pancreas. We don't need you making any insulin. We don't want the blood sugar to drop. And just imagine that your unconscious mind is preparing you, like we're starving to death, and next thing you have a hearty meal. Well, the pancreas is unprepared. And now, an hour later, this great surge of glucose and amino acid stuff appears in the blood, hits the pancreas, and says, "Oh, Mac, look at this." And so automatically these cells produce a stack of insulin. But a lot of that sugar's gone out in the urine, dragged water with it. And then an hour later, the insulin's still working, but the blood sugar's already started to drop. And it drops it too far. So an hour later, the person is suffering from symptoms of hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. They're shaky and nervy, and they get this thing, if I don't eat, I'm going to die. So you get this funny thing, you get the symptoms of diabetes with all this urine being produced, and then you're dry and you're drinking like that, and then next thing you're doing this panic eating, and you're getting fatter, and that's what it's about. But while I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, these are the figures. 25% of millennials say, we don't like ourselves. We're lonely. 25% of the millennials these days, this is the United States. I have no friends. I'm not enjoying being alive. If I could take my life, I'd be happy to do it, etc., etc., etc. It's about 1/4 of these millennial generation. And there is an increasing incidence of suicide in young people. And there's also, this is Australia and the US, a half of all pregnancies are unwanted, and a half of those pregnancies are terminated. 25% of pregnancies are callously just straight out. And 25% of these millennials say they feel unloved. I think that we are in danger of destroying ourselves. We have got to stop doing what we're doing. We've got to stop. We can't let people callously starve. We can't callously let people starve to death. And we have to respect women. We've just got to do it, because otherwise we're in a complete shambles. So I'll.
No, I just run on from that and say epigenetics. You talk about epigenetics, which really just means above genetics, because we've kind of bought into this from a scientific point of view too, that you're bound by your genes. It'll happen to grandma and grandpa and then their parents and their parents, so it's destined to happen to you. But what what's his name is? Bruce Lipton.
That's right.
Bruce Lipton discovered, being a cell biologist, is that our genes are not as controlling of us as we think. They're actually influenced by our belief systems.
Right.
So you go back to what you were saying, right? Jesus says it this way: I'll put the sheep over here and the goats over there. And he says to the sheep, whenever you fed me when I was hungry, or visited me when I was in jail, or helped me when I was sick, you did it. You were doing it to me whenever you did it to the least of them. They said, we have no recollection of doing it to you at all. He says, no, if you're doing it to the least, you're doing it to me. There's this connection, realizing that we're collectively one race, we're one people. Then you add to that, Bill, explain to them how in Asia and in those cultures they actually have a ceremony around the hungry goats, reinforcing this belief system.
Yeah, well, actually, if you happen to make a wise decision and purchase one of these, you'll get a copy of The Hungry Ghosts and Type 2 Diabetes. In Singapore every year, on the 7th month of the Asian calendar, is the month of the ghosts, month of the hungry ghosts. Now, they've apparently been let out of hell for a month. And on the 15th day of that month, which this year was the 15th of August, they have this festival. Now, that's this day where there's people put food out. They'll often have paper automobiles and paper money, and they'll burn those to become spirit cars to drive around in. And there's in the independent newspaper in Singapore, there's these 30 things that you mustn't do during the day. Women mustn't wear red dresses and high heels and walk down the middle of the road at night. Anyone would do that anyway, it's silly. If you're at a prayer meeting or something, do not look under the altar. I don't know why, but if you're walking along and you feel someone tap you on the shoulder, don't turn around. But if you've got a wound that's open, you must cover it with it. No, nothing open. I don't know if the hungry ghosts will sneak in and grab you or whatever. But the Chinese people take this very seriously. So they have this festival of the hungry ghosts every year, and it's the hungry ghost saying to us, this is how we died, don't forget us.
It's almost like something in their psyche is saying, almost like have a communion for them.
Well, that's right.
It's like, they don't quite have all the answers, but they feel there's this need culturally to do this, to honour those hungry ghosts.
To see them.
Yeah. Try and heal that part.
There was a legend that somebody, he was looking for his mother in the spirit world, and he found her in this area where these hungry ghosts. So he tried to get her some food, and the hungry ghost gobbled it all up. So he arranged with Buddha feeder. Well, if that's about as closest to the communion service as you can get, like feed me with it. So this was my plan to mention the healing of the family tree. It works. I do it all the time. It works, so any comments anyone's got or questions? It's a different theology.
To say to you that I was reading a book by Rory Jensen. Do you know who Rory Jensen is? Yeah. Okay. And in her book, she's saying that our DNA lasts for 7 generations. Okay, and that like I've just become a great grandma, so there's 5 generations of us. So I was really fascinated by this. And I'm looking at the idea that in another 40 years, that 7th generation, that little kid running around down there, he's going to have 1% of me in him. Because our DNA goes down each generation as to what comes from us and goes down through the family. But family traits, for the want of a better word, are quite astounding when you look into them. And what you were saying, what we didn't know about relatives back then, that if you're only going to have this DNA for 7 generations, it must be, once that 7th generation runs out, there's still 6 more for it to go down. But not of me exactly, but of the ones that I've passed on to the ones after me.
And you've got to remember that this world is really just a correspondence of a much grander spiritual world. So what's the DNA's message?
Yes,
something inside us is lasting long beyond our body.
Yes.
Yeah, something of all of us. Yeah.
Yes. So it doesn't actually, even though it's only 1% is there in 7 generations, there's still these parts of us that are going to go on. And that's why in the Bible, where it talks about the seed of the man, that's so important because it's going to pass down to every generation. And you can't even say just because I'm adopted into a family, because being adopted into a family just gives you double blessing, because you've got the original family and you've got the adopted family.
Beautiful.
So,
I like the way she took that into a double blessing.
Yeah,
That's good.
right.
That's great. Yeah.
Right, we got I expected to cause a bit more controversy, but a full tummy doesn't serve.
Yes.
Right. Yes.
And that correlates again. Well, that correlates to.
Right, Chris, you got something to say? The young
You're both Chris.
the price-like-looking man behind us.
Will come DNA lasting
we all reckon
through a
it looks
certain
like
amount of
that's
generations. And we were saying the DNA is not necessarily, well, our beliefs can change,
Yes.
or maybe, I don't know, switch on or off.
That's right.
Perfect.
Parts of our
Epigenetics. Yes.
And like what you said, well, what's our DNA trying to tell us?
Yep.
So if we're, and to retract a little bit about the unconscious collectiveness, if hypothetically we may all believe the same thing, and if trauma can flick a switch in our DNA,
And it does.
and love can flick a switch in our DNA,
And it does.
we're all running on the same. So if we all have the same sort of beliefs, is that gonna flick good switches in our DNA? And if we can do that for a certain amount of generations, is that maybe possibly?
Can I just explain something about my mother abandoned us, and I was the baby of the family. So my father decided that he would take us to his sister's house and ask her to look after us for 3 months while he got everybody's life in order. And so that 3 months lasted until my brother and I got married. We left that house on the day of our wedding. Now, interesting thing is, people who don't realise that we weren't my aunt's children say how much like my mum I was. Now, my auntie was a woman of great mercy. She had. We got to live into a house where the woman of the house was already looking after both the mothers, her husband's mother and her mother, who didn't like each other and argued all the time. Plus the grandfather, who was regularly trying to commit suicide because he had ringing in years, and eventually did manage to do that. And then she had the alcoholic uncle, and then she took us kids in. Now, yes, she was, yes, but she was, to me, as I grew up, she was a reflection of Jesus, the attitude of Jesus, as the woman who washed the feet of the people that came to the house.
Yes.
You know, and so I grew up learning that as a natural part of how you look after people and what you do for them. And so that became a part of my personality. Now, that's not DNA for me. That was gospel
nurture
DNA.
versus nature.
Yes.
Nurture versus nature.
Yes.
And I'm going to say that nurture wins out. It really does. You still have to deal with your nature. Nurture wins out.
Yes.
One of the things I try to do is I try to remind myself that you're not the only one looking at me through those eyes of yours. The Lord's there too. And it helps me have compassion, mercy, time, patience. It helps me love you back because the Lord's there with you. And if I don't love you, then I'm not loving the Lord. Come on. It's good to remember you're not the only ones looking out these eyes.
Look, I want to say something about. I went to a Christian conference, Christian Doctors Conference, in 2011, and there was a Korean surgeon talking about the fact that his 13-year-old son had been run into by a speedster in Seoul. And then he had this slide. The poor kid went 23 feet through the air and landed on his head. Then he had the picture. His skull was all bashed in one side and there's a big clot of blood and the brain was pushed over. I don't know how many fractures, but he was still alive. Anyway, this surgeon was a Christian, and he took a bit of the kid's clothing to the pastor, just as a connection. And the pastor prayed for the kid in the hospital. And then the kid's father, who was a surgeon, he noticed something unbelievable. He said it was as though there was like a sacred space around this board.
Quantum bubble.
Yeah, something there. And all the tissues within there that were all broken and damaged were growing and connecting together as if they were fetal tissues. And see, when we talk about these generations, see, I've got the DNA of a 90-year-old man in it, which I haven't used yet. I've got a template. Say if every 7 years we go, say you're born, you're newborn, and you're 7 years old, and you're 14, 28, 30, etc. That's a very common belief. I think it could actually be true. So there's a template in there. Now, I've thought of some spiritual healing that might take place like this. You say, here's a person who's been very badly damaged, either by a disease process or injuries. So you say, Lord, please send your Holy Spirit through to connect with the basic body spirit of this person, and see if we can go back to the previous template. In the previous, when you're 55, if you're a woman, you're 55, the ovaries aren't working too well. But if you can go back to 45, they're working okay. So So you could say if you've got something wrong with you, you've got ovarian cancer, say, or you've got something that's wrong. You could say, ask the Holy Spirit to connect with the spirit of the body that's actually running all this stuff. And you say, could you please go to the computer, call up that template, that 45-year-old template, and could you ask the cells to just reproduce that? It's like calling up another file. And I think that somehow that's, I hope to get to use this 90-year-old template in here. When I had my triple bypass done on the 8th of February, I think I went back to I got the energy I had when I was 60. So I flicked back basically 16 years. So back to there. So that's associated with this. We're now talking. Something's associated with reincarnation, with this extra spirits, and what the Aboriginal people believe. But I thought the topic of reincarnation might come up today, so I prepared something on that. But it's not coming up, so I don't want to introduce it. But I think that the templates that we've got, I think that's got something to do with healing.
I'm even wondering about stem cells.
Stem cells.
Yeah, because
It's getting more and more mysterious, isn't it?
yes, it's really mysterious. Medicine is actually using. They're not even having to concentrate on embryo stem cells. Stem cells of your own body is being used to heal the cancer cells of the ones that have gone out of whack of the own as a donor from the own person, and it's reversing the effects.
Information, yeah. But if it's okay, look, from a new church perspective, the way we see something like reincarnation, we talked earlier about that we're a multi-self. So you've got angels and other groups supporting you on your journey. And you see the examples of where people have these memories of lives they've lived. Right? And you go, well, what is that? And I can understand why people believe in reincarnation. I can. Because something's going on. Okay? You can't deny that something's going on. But Swedenborg found that if an angel just looks you in the face, they suddenly share all of your memories as though they were their memories. This is how we communicate in the world, in heaven. You can just look at a person and share all your experiences with them. It's amazing. They know what you feel and what it was like to be you. Well, it makes sense, and this is happening a lot with little children too. Really young, by the time they're about 7, it stops. A lot of young children have these memories of past lives. I'm suggesting they're tapping into those soul groups of people who were once on Earth. That's all it is. They're tapping into it. I leave that for you to decide how you want to see it. I mean, Swedenborg spent 27 years touring the heavens and getting, understanding how things were. I always said, well, look, you think if reincarnation happened, that one of the angels would have tapped him on the shoulder and said, by the way, we need to tell you about this. And they didn't. So I leave, if people believe in reincarnation, I don't mind. That's for them to choose. And I can understand why. But it makes more sense to me that we're connecting with those who were once here and we're having those memories. Because look at these children, they get to 7 or so, boom, it stops. They lose those memories. Oh, that's, yeah. So,
The shows on TV, where did you come from? And they go into these people's lives, and they're going back generations and generations, and suddenly they find out, oh God, I've got the same traits as this Uncle Hardy. I never even knew about existing.
Yeah.
And I've got those same traits. They're passed on. So yes. And now we're getting younger generations come through who have got far more perception and consciousness about what's going on.
Yes.
The Bible talks about in those end times
Quickening.
there will be quickening. And I see that happening. And I think I don't despair, because I think I've always prayed, Lord, let those scales fall away from my eyes, from all our eyes.
Yeah.
So we can stand up and be who we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And you know, like I'm in the 60s, I was going to change the world, going to go out and protest and we do all these things. But then, it's all like we self-defeated. We all started complying. And the ones who even went off, like one of my mates went off and they became hippies and lived out in the wilderness. They're all driving around in BMWs now. Because, you know, like everybody moves out, the city grew, and suddenly their land became very, you know, the best land. And so now they're driving BMWs. And I look at all this and I think, well, you can think the world is in a terrible state, but I do believe that genetic flow, that if what was birthed in us was good, and most of it living a pretty good old age. And we see the despair and the despondency of so many people. Yet we all cringe inside. We all cringe about what's going on in the news. We think, oh my God, you know, like,
if you turn it on.
Is it ever going to end? When is it going to stop?
Yeah.
And, you know, but yet, really, what underpins all that is your faith.
Yes.
So if you believe, I believe that what was birthed in us from the beginning will stay there to the end and the ultimate resurrection of ourselves through Christ.
And Jesus said it this way, you know, the world and all that's in it's passing away. And we've all felt like we want to do some good in the world, don't we? We've all wanted to impact it, like you said, and change the world. But as you get older, you realise this is the world I need to change. And if I can change this world and encourage others to do the same, then it's enough. It really is, because what's out there is whatever it needs to be to wake people up. Some people need a little bit more louder shouting, but at least we're waking. At least we're those who are awake, isn't it? So this is the world that we've got to look to change, and encourage others the same. Yeah.
Right, the poem.
Okay.
And part of the ending of that poem is the part of us that was missing becomes the full unconscious mind. That's in time's beginning and it's ending. Oh, it's rhythm and it's right.
Wow.
And I see it. Why did I write that? I haven't got it very mind, you know, I haven't studied. And yet I see all these things all the time. I write it down because I feel it's all given to me to put it there. And mine's not the hand that wrote. It is the hand that ripped. I understand that saying. Because sometimes things are given to us. We've all got individual gifts. Mm-hmm. And we all become part of the whole. And that's what makes the world own.
Very
you know, and we just got to become awakened to that. And then you see the beauty in everybody and everything.
That's beautiful, Earl. Carl, where do I get Earl? Earl. Carl, yes, Carl.
How many people do you know who knows how to write sonnets? This guy writes sonnets.
Yes.
Oh, beautiful.
You know, I think when we get more spiritual too, we realise life is flowing through us. Like Carl's saying, how do I write this? He doesn't know. It's the divine happening in you, Carl. And just let's remember this. Not one of us is a mistake. Not one of us is a mistake. Every one of us is created to be a unique, finite expression of good and truth. And that's what we are. So, well, maybe we just leave it there and we'll have a cup of tea. If there's any more questions, we do it out there. So let's keep doing it.